post it out on YouTube later and send you all a link. So I'm going to encourage you to keep your name, your first and last name in that Zoom box. And then if you have a question that pops up, then if you could put that in the chat, we would appreciate it. Put it in the chat and we will try to hit all of those toward the end. Josh and I are going to split up the time here. So we're both talkers. So we'll see. We'll see how this goes. Hopefully we'll get it all in there. And we won't have to cut anything out. But if we do, then you'll have the resources at the end. So welcome to this presentation, How to Combat the Long-Term Impacts of Sedentary Workdays. I am Dr. Carrie Davidson. I'm the fitness manager here at UK Health and Wellness. And we have also got Josh here from Occupational Health and Safety. And so he is going to do part of this presentation. So this is a fabulous collaboration, hopefully the first of several other things that we can do together to help people feel better during their workday. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen so we can make sure that everybody can see what they need to see. And we'll slip that around. There you go. Now you're seeing the right one. So again, type your questions in the chat and change your Zoom name to your first and last name so that we can make sure and address you and that we can make sure and get everybody the resources that they need. So I'm going to go ahead and get started because we do have a lot of information that we want to cover for you. So again, how to combat the long-term impacts of sedentary workdays. This is kind of where we're going to be headed today. We're going to talk about the physical impacts and the physiology. We're going to talk about the mind, mood, so mental, emotional impacts of sitting all day, and then give you some tips and tricks on how to combat that, what you can do about it, both at your workstation and then as you move about the cabin, as I like to say, moving around. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. So wherever you are, grab a scratch piece of paper and draw yourself a big circle. It's a clock. You can do this in your mind, but it works a whole lot better if you actually draw this out on a scratch piece of paper. You can throw it away afterwards. It doesn't have to be anything that you're going to keep. So draw yourself a clock with the 3, 6, 9, and 12 marks. 3, 6, 9, and 12. And then we're going to split up that clock, and I want you to realistically put up the time that you spend either sitting or laying down. So if you're asleep in your bed, or maybe not asleep, but if you're at least in the bed for 6 to 8 hours, go ahead and fill in. You can make it like a pie chart if that works for you. You can write on the outside 6 to 8 hours of sleep time. Include your commute time. How much time do you spend sitting in your car on average each day? Make sure you get in there your sedentary work day. If you really are glued to your desk for 8 hours, put that in there. Anytime that you sit down. So that also might mean you watch an hour of TV every night, or you have a seated hobby. You sit and crochet, read a book, play a video game. How much time do you spend on average in a day doing that? Eating, going to the bathroom. All of those times that are spent in a seated position or a laying down position. So this can be a very eye-opening experience for people. Usually when people see how much time they actually do spend either seated or laying down, it's a little bit of an eye-opener. So we're here today to see if we can do something about that, because the long-term effects of sitting can be very detrimental to our health, our physical health, and our mental emotional health. So this is one of my favorite graphics that I show when I give presentations of all sorts. So you can see that the skeleton on the right he's lit up in blue, right? So he's got good posture. We'll just say that, good posture. Whereas the skeleton on the left, he's green, he has poor posture. But I want to point out just a few things about this posture on the right. His elbows are about 90 degrees. His hips are about 90 degrees. And his knees are about 90 degrees. So that's a good rule of thumb, 90 degrees for elbows, hips, and knees. And then the next thing I'm going to point out is his wrists. His wrists are pretty neutral. And then finally, the head. If he had ears, you can't see them in this, but if he had ears, they would be directly over the shoulders. Now, compare all of those things to your skeleton on the left. Skeleton on the left has a really big knee angle, a really small elbow angle, which is creating a bend in the wrist. He's got that kyphotic or forward posture in the thoracic spine, like around the shoulders. That's what's going to make us all end up a humpback if we keep doing that for long periods of time. And the forward head. He's looking at his screen. Maybe his screen's a little bit low. Josh is going to talk about that. But he's got that forward head position. So we're talking about the skeleton on the left having neck pain, back pain, hip pain, maybe even headaches, tension headaches, eye strain, all sorts of things that can happen with the skeleton on the left. So ergonomics is going to be the number one thing. We have to sit at our desks at least a little bit. There are some things that we can do to not sit at the desk, but we have to sit at the desk just a little bit. So if we're going to spend any amount of time there, let's set ourselves up for success and do it in the way that best helps the body to be able to stay in that position for long periods of time. So when we sit, this is sort of my area of expertise as an exercise physiologist. So many problems can come up. So not just those musculoskeletal problems that we just looked at with those skeleton, but more chronic conditions, particularly vascular problems. Now, this might seem familiar if you go on a long trip and you sit in a car, sit in an airplane for a long time, and people will say, pump the ankles, move the legs around, get up and walk around. And most of the time we're thinking about blood pooling in the lower extremities. If you have tired, achy, swollen feet, knees, ankles, then this might be an indication. That might be your first tip that vascular problems are forming. And you could even form blood clots if we're sitting for long periods of time without any movement. And we don't want blood clots because those travel to the lungs, those travel to the brain. It ends up being a bad situation all the way around. So vascular problems, even varicose veins, things like that. Those are all related to blood flow and circulation. So that's one of the detriments of sitting for long periods of time. Another one might be that stress on the spine. There have been lots of studies showing how much extra pressure, a significant amount of pressure and stress is on the spine, shoulders, and hips when we sit. Whereas if we stand, it automatically takes the pressure off. If we think back to that skeleton that we just looked at in the previous slide, you could see that that skeleton had some curves, right? There's a cervical curve that comes forward. There's a thoracic curve that pushes backwards, a lumbar curve that pushes forward. And that's by design. When we're upright in a standing posture, then our spine is made to absorb the shock, so to speak. It's like a spring, and it's made to absorb that shock. But when we sit, we're breaking that chain, we're breaking that slinky, so to speak. And so we end up with a lot of stress on the spine, shoulders, and hips, which causes those postural misalignments. Tight hip flexors, so those muscles that run right in front of your hip. If you lay down flat and your legs don't touch, that might be a good indication that you've got tight hip flexors. There's also a condition called glute amnesia, which I really like the name of that. But basically the glutes forget how to fire. So the glute max is where we're sitting. We've got glute medius as well. We've got some other muscles back there, but they get amnesia and they forget how to fire. And so they quit functioning properly, which is part of our stability, our hip stability. Lower cross and upper cross syndrome. So we're going to talk about both of those at the end if we have some extra time. But I'm going to show you a slide next of what that looks like. So all sorts of lower back and spine issues. The next one is heart disease. Not many people will associate seated positions with heart disease, but it's true. Sitting impacts the blood vessels like we talked about, sugar regulation, blood pressure. So all of those things are connected to our cardiovascular health. So cardiac arrest, heart attack, heart disease is a real thing just from lack of movement. So that means sitting. And then obesity. Of course, we know if we don't move around very much, then that's going to have significant impact on our weight. So, we used to have to go to the well to get water, go to the woods to get food, walk to talk to the neighbor. We don't have to do those things anymore. We can just Teams chat people. We can just email people. Things get delivered right to our doorstep. We just go to the kitchen to get water. So we're not moving around as our bodies were designed once upon a time to be moving. Additionally, we sit in front of a screen. Maybe it's a TV screen, maybe it's a phone screen, maybe it's a computer screen. And when that happens and we eat, we lose all mindfulness of eating, right? So we have no idea what we ate, how much we ate, or what it even tasted like. And so all of these things can help contribute to obesity. Besides obesity, a sedentary lifestyle is a risk factor for lots of other conditions, including cancer. So obesity, cancer, heart disease, lower back problems, vascular issues, lots of things can happen when we sit for long periods of time without any breaks. So I mentioned upper cross and lower cross syndrome. Upper cross syndrome is the picture on the left. You can see he has that rounded shoulder blades for that humpback position and the forward head. Whenever I earlier said our ears should be over our shoulders, like that skeleton on the right side of that first graphic, you can see that this guy is sort of in a C curve. His head is forward, which means that his traps aren't doing their job. His lats aren't doing their job to hold his head up. His pecs and shoulders and chest probably pretty tight, probably tight in the upper traps and the muscles that lift and lower the shoulder blades. So that all contributes to this sort of rolled over forward position. And then this wreaks havoc in the neck, the head, the back, down the arms, hands, wrists, tingles, all sorts of things can happen. The graphic on the right is our lower cross syndrome. So it's the exact same scenario, just different bones and muscles that get affected. So when we sit for long periods of time, our core gets weak. We're not having to use our core to hold ourselves up. So we have weak abdominals. And then, like I mentioned, our glutes sort of go on vacation. Those get weak because they're not firing off. So then what happens is when our abs are weak, our belly starts to push forward, creating tightness in the back of the body. So that lumbar spine and those muscles back there start to get really, really tight, and we end up with those tight hip flexors in the front. So it's a crisscross situation down below too. So that's lower cross syndrome. So it can happen up top, down below, one or the other, or both. And so there are definitely things that we can do about it. Now, those are a lot of our physiological and physical changes or things that can happen with sitting for long periods of time. So forget about 8 hours. Think about 8 hours every day, 52 weeks out of the year for 20 years of your career. That's a long time sitting. These are going to happen. It's almost a guaranteed situation unless we do something about it. The other part of that is the way that it affects our mood and our emotions. So I was looking at a lot of research before I did this presentation as I was prepping, and there is significant research for all of these things to happen. The longer we sit, the higher risk we have for anxiety and depression and social dysfunction and anger and fatigue and tension and confusion. So just about all of those, what we would call negative emotions or mental states can happen from sitting for long periods of time. And then I just thought that this one was interesting. Inflammation. Inflammation is the cause of a lot of our chronic diseases. And so inflammation significantly increases with more sitting. So hopefully I've convinced you by this point to get up and move around. And so that's the answer. That's what we want to do. We want to move more. And so we're going to move now into some strategies to move more so that we can have better cognitive performance, more energy, more vigor. We can reduce our food cravings, decrease the levels of fatigue, and all of those things. So we can have the benefits of movement. That is what we are here for today. So let's start with a few strategies in an office setup. So the left side here is some movement strategies for a work situation. If you print, then I suggest moving your printer. I, for one, at UK, do not even have a printer. I have to go to someone else's office and print there. So if you can centralize your printing services, good for the environment, good for your movement. You have to actually go walk to pick up something off the printer or to make your copies. So the further away you can make the essential things that you have to go walk to, the more movement you're going to get up in your day. You're breaking up that 8 hours of sitting at the desk. So move your printer further away. And then this is one of my favorite habits. I actually started this when I was a young child, and I'm going to date myself here. But do you remember, no show of hands or anything, but do you remember when phones were attached to walls? They had cords. We didn't have these fantastic little mobile things. So anytime the phone rang, you had to get up and go walk to it to pick it up and say hello, unless you had one in every room in the house. And so I started doing this when I was young, and I would stand up when the phone rings and I would pace and walk around every time the phone rang. And I still do it. Now, even if I talk on my cell phone, I'll pace the office, I'll pace the house, wherever I am, I'll pace a waiting room, I'll just walk around. It doesn't even have to be a big spot. But the phone ringing is an auditory trigger that will help you to remember, oh, interruption, got to do something different. And that interruption, got to do something different, is changing your position. So move around when the phone rings. Send less emails and less Teams messages. I am for that. So if you are in the same proximity as your colleagues and your teammates, then perhaps you could just walk over to their office or their cubicle and talk to them instead of sitting and sending a Teams message or sending an email. If you are working on Central Campus, even if you're not working on Central Campus, but we have more opportunities on Central Campus to park far away. So you can always choose the Orange Lot, the stadium, Cornerstone Garage, and get a few extra steps in during your day. But if you're not working on Central Campus, still take the parking spot that's in the very back of the lot. So maybe you're at Kroger, maybe you're at Walmart, maybe you're at some office building. Park in the very last spot and work in a few extra steps. It might take 2 extra minutes, not even 2 extra minutes, to walk that extra few steps. And then use the bathroom farthest away. Again, if you are on campus or you're in an office building, you don't have to use the bathroom that's right there. Go to the other floor, go up, go down, go to the one that's farther away from you. I try to practice this every single time I'm on campus and find the bathroom that's farthest away, and that's the one I'll try to use. And it's an easy way to get in just a few extra steps, break up your workday just a little bit more. And then many of us are wearing devices on our arms. We're carrying devices in our pockets that buzz and beep for all sorts of reasons. So one of those reasons could be to set a reminder to get up. I know my Garmin goes off every hour. If I don't move, if I don't take enough steps, it'll go move with an exclamation point. It's not even nice about it. Move. But some of them are a little nicer about it. If you're wearing certain brands, you might be closing rings. Whatever your app is, you can set a reminder on your calendar. You can set a reminder on your phone. Your watch might have a reminder, but set a reminder to get up. And it would be best if that reminder was a beep or a vibration, because that is a sensory trigger that's going to interrupt your train of thought. If you hear something, if you feel something, or if you see something pop up in your visual field, those are going to be sensory interceptors. And so that will most likely stop you, and then you can actually do it and not ignore it. Another option would be to start a walking group in your office. On our website, which I will show you all at the end if we have some time, on our website, we have a lot of walking maps mapped out all over campus, out at South Creek, Alumni Park Plaza, all sorts of places. There are lots of good walking places in and around Lexington or wherever you are. If there's a sidewalk and a light, you're in good shape. So maybe you take your meeting outdoors and do a walking meeting. So those are always great options. Also helps to kick in that cognitive function of thinking outside the box. So when you get outside the office, you're thinking outside the box and you're more likely to come up with creative solutions to problems that you guys are working on in a meeting. And then finally, office stretches and chair yoga. Again, at the end, if we've got some time, I'm going to take you through just some basic, simple stretches that you can do either standing or sitting, but you can do it in an office setting. So those are some of my favorite ways to move around more when I'm at the office, whatever your work situation might be. And then at home, I try to do the same thing. So I've got a list for you on the right of ways to increase movement while you're at home. So make several trips to unload your groceries. Now, I also recruit my children to come and do this, but instead of taking 15 bags in each hand, take two, walk it in, take two, walk it in, take two, walk it in. Again, it only just takes a few extra minutes, but it helps you to load, right? Because you're loaded up holding heavy things, spinal loading, maybe, also walking around more. So just helps to move around in different ways. I use the laundry as an excuse to get up. I mean, if we have to do laundry, might as well we might as well get some benefit besides clean clothes out of the laundry. So I wait for one day and do all my laundry in one day. And then I can get up all day long. Every time the washer buzzes, I go flop the laundry and come back. Keep working. Next buzz, go switch the laundry, come back, keep working. Go switch the laundry. So if I save it all up for one day, then I can move around more. And then whenever it's time to fold and put away laundry, I do not put it in a basket and walk around the house. This is child number one stack. Walk it in, come back. Child number two stack. Walk it in, come back. So I do these sorts of things at home to try to increase steps as well. This was especially potent during COVID, but now that a lot of us are working from home more often, it still applies. And I do the same thing when I'm unloading the dishwasher, right? Try to make as many trips through and around the kitchen as possible. Doing your own yard work or partial yard work, if you can trim bushes, pick up leaves, pick up sticks, all those things that help you just to move around a little bit more. And then at the grocery store, one of the other things that I like to do is make one whole trip around the store before I pick anything up and put it in my cart. That's another way to get in on just a few extra steps. And then don't let the dog out. Go walk the dog. Don't let the dog out, then the dog's getting the benefit and you're not. So go walk the dog with a leash and your tennis shoes and you're walking too. And then if there is a favorite show that you're watching, try to sit down on the floor and stretch during commercials. Stand up during commercials. Walk on a treadmill during commercials. Take a walk around the block on a commercial. Use those breaks as natural breaks in your sitting to get up and go do something else. So little strategies make a big difference. Go back to that clock that you did at the very beginning of this presentation and see how much of your time is really spent in a seated or supine laying down position. And then you can make a little bit of difference here, a little bit of difference there to make a big difference in that whole clock. So little things really add up to make a big difference. And then of course, we also have resources here on campus through UK Health and Wellness. We have our fitness memberships. We have exercise consults. If you don't know where to get started, we offer personal training, group fitness classes, specialty classes. We do have a program called Move Well Rewards that actually rewards you with cash for taking steps as long as you're syncing your device. So we have a lot of resources here to help make it easy, trying to make movement the easy choice for getting up and moving around more during the workday, but then also during the evening time. So I've been talking quite a bit. I'm going to give control over to Josh here and let him take over.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's see. Is it?
Can you see that little arrow?
Yeah. It's oh, it does not seem to be working.
We see your
Although that's
slides.
the
Yep, you're doing it. We see your slides.
okay. All right. So my name is Josh Valverde. I'm with UK Occupational Health and Safety. If you don't know what Occupational Health and Safety does or what we are a branch under Environmental Health and Safety. And so Occupational Health and Safety does things like injury, illness, follow up. We do audits of physical locations. We do audits of departments and their written programs required by OSHA. Ergonomics is a small piece of also of what we do as well. And so I wanted to kind of share, some of the things that we do as far as ergonomic assessments and general inquiries into ergonomics. So leading off, what is ergonomics? That's a really great question, and I think sometimes people may not be too familiar with what ergonomics is. Essentially, it's a study of how workers fit to their work environment, whether that be an office space or a production assembly line, you name it. Wherever a worker is, how does that job fit to them? How does the equipment fit to them? And so that's really what ergonomics looks at. It can be it can become pretty complicated. When you really start to dive into the individual worker and their workspace. But today, obviously, we're going to focus on kind of that sedentary work style. So more or less the office space. Would be happy to at the end answer any questions if you have other concerns outside of an office environment. We'd be more than happy to discuss that too. But that's really what ergonomics it looks at is how those workers interact with their work environment. Is it showing it on your end? Oh, there we go. I don't know if it's just slow to react or what. Why is it important? Well, obviously, ergonomics and poor ergonomic fits can cause work-related something called an MSD, musculoskeletal disorder. So it can cause injuries, right? If you're in a work environment, whether it's at your seat or your chair in your office space, and it doesn't fit you well, or the equipment that you have, doesn't work very well for you, or maybe it's something to the effect of we have poor postures because of those issues. We can obviously start to have pain and issues to creep up, and it can definitely turn into what we would consider a work-related injury or work-related musculoskeletal disorder. So that's why ergonomics itself is pretty important to hopefully prevent some of those from ever occurring. And if we do have some issues to creep up, hopefully we can address them and provide some comfort and some relief for those. So generally speaking, musculoskeletal disorders involve kind of the soft tissues of the body, tendons, nerves, muscles. However, it can certainly impact others. Typically, you see those a lot more with kind of more physical related activities, but they can certainly be other than soft tissue for musculoskeletal disorders. And then, of course, the work related would essentially be there are work factors that will impact and can cause those to become work related musculoskeletal disorders. So, what are some signs and symptoms of said musculoskeletal disorders? They can range, right? If you just get into a job and you just get into an office environment, it can just generally start off as discomfort, some soreness, maybe, as time goes on or repetition really starts to become a factor, obviously the signs and symptoms can become more severe up to the point where they can essentially be debilitating for the individual person, right? And then everything in between. I go home and my arms, my shoulders, my neck, it's so sore and it keeps me up at night, right? So it can really range from kind of a general soreness to the point of it really impacts the individual person, not only at work but also at home as well. And so that's really what we hope to not see, because at that point in time, it can really be a quite an issue at that point. What are some types? These here's a pretty good list of kind of the general ones that most everyone has probably heard of. Maybe not the entire list, but most everyone's probably heard of at least some of these. Carpal tunnel is really the big one, the trigger name. I think most everyone has probably heard of that before. Um, Things like tendonitis, strain sprains, trigger finger. That's another really common one. It can happen in office environments. It also happens a lot of times in kind of your factory setting where there's a lot of stress, a lot of times from repetitive motions of grasping things. Low back pain. Generally when I do ergonomic assessments, a lot of times what I'll see is back pain's definitely a high frequency for discomfort and pains that people experience. Shoulder, neck pain is really kind of the next two that I see pretty often. And then, hands, wrists, fingers, and that can be pain, numbness, tingling. A lot of times I'll see some of those type of issues. And so, some of the other ones, they can come and go. Tennis elbow, that's not one that I see too often with office related musculoskeletal disorders, but that can certainly creep up. And I will say, with these MSDs, a lot of times, I think there can be multiple things going on, whether it's at work or at home. I think a lot of times those can work in conjunction with one another, unfortunately, and we can start to have these issues to creep up, and it will impact us in our working day. So, what contributes? Carrie did a great job, really talking about a lot of things that will contribute and factor into discomfort, pain, and other musculoskeletal disorders. But 100% awkward, sustained positions, poor posturing, forceful exertion, and you don't necessarily see that as much in an office environment, but it certainly could happen, right? Maybe there's a work task that does involve us having to exert a excessive amount of force. Like I said, I don't see it too often, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. Repetitive motions, that one 100%, it will happen. Keyboarding, using your mouse, other functions like that. Those are definitely motions that are repetitive over time. And then duration, right? If you spend 8 hours a day, 5 days a week doing these same things, especially if it's a poor posture, or poor position, it can lead eventually to a work-related musculoskeletal disorder, right? So a lot of those in conjunction with one another, that's really where we can see those start to occur, and it can really build up quite fast. Some other issues that can arise. Now, once again, these may not necessarily happen too often at an office environment, but they can certainly impact. And I think sometimes you can even think about some of these too, if these are some tasks or activities that you do outside of work. I could absolutely see it potentially kind of creeping into the work environment too, and start causing some discomfort as well. But contact stress, vibration from using heavy tools, equipment. So if you do a lot of yard work, a lot of maybe you have a side gig outside of work, right? Where a lot of that happens, use a lot of power tools. Absolutely, those are definitely factors that could cause musculoskeletal disorders. Could also be temperature extremes too, right? If you work in a really cold environment, uh, you know, the joints can become a little bit more stiff, and so those are definitely factors too. So when it comes to the workstation, a few things to think about. We'll talk about this graphic a little bit, but I like to break down, office ergonomics kind of into two main factors. One of them is the equipment that we use. So that would be the chair, the computer, monitors directly in front of you, mouse, keyboard, all that stuff, all the physical items. And then the other feature that I like to think about is the positioning in that space, the posture, the habits, behaviors that we have, right? That's generally how when I do an ergonomic assessment, I like to break it down into looking at those two main factors. But how those two interact with each other is, as we were talking about earlier, that's really where we start to have musculoskeletal disorders to pop up. So when we think about, our primary working zone in a computer workstation, really the best way to think about it is to kind of breaking it down into three main zones. You'll see in that graphic, we've got a primary working zone, and then we've got the yellow area, which would be considered our secondary working zone, and then the red is kind of considered a non-working space. So really with that primary working zone, how you want to view that is those are the items like the keyboard, the mouse, maybe a notepad, where you are going to be using it, I would say, pretty dang close to 100% of the time, right? At least 75% of the time. That's really where that primary working zone is. So you want to keep them as close into your body as possible, right? And so what that will do is that will prevent from excessive reach. If you look on that graphic there, we've got the individual reaching out to the phone, which in that example would be perfectly fine, right? I don't think, at least nowadays, most people don't use the landline phones too. At least I know I don't. I'm sure there are folks that do still use it pretty often, but if you're a person that maybe you get a phone call once a day, maybe it's twice, two, three times a day in that secondary zone, perfectly fine. But really, the main aspect that we're really considering here is we're trying to prevent excessive reaching with the hands and the arms. And so, from my experience, when I've done ergonomic assessments, I've occasionally I've seen folks with their keyboards extended out into that secondary working zone, and so what ends up happening is they're extending their arms pretty far out, and then it does. I have seen it to create some tension and some stress and kind of the shoulder blade up even up to the neck area, and so keeping those items in those primary working items, keyboard, mouse, if you take notes, things like that, keeping them close in, kind of in that primary zone is really what we would look to do. Secondary zone, that would be, items like your phone that, you may seldom use, but occasionally you do have to reach to grab it. Maybe your coffee cup, maybe, some secondary notes, maybe some notes that you are looking at as kind of as a referral every now and then. That's where you would store those. A great thing to do would be to have a document holder to prevent you from having to look down at your computer desk too often. So that's a quick and easy thing. It would just hold it up at an angle directly towards you, almost like a computer screen. And then non-working zone, that's just all these other items that you seldom reach for, but it's there, if you need it, right? Your headphones, your keys, items kind of similar to those. And so that's essentially how we would look at the computer workstation, kind of breaking it down into those zones. And so when I come in and do an ergonomic assessment, that's one of the things I'll look for. And I will sometimes ask, like, how often do you actually grab this item? Because sometimes another on the flip side, what I'll see is, people may have kind of a cluttered primary working zone. They'll have their phone, they'll have all sorts of other items, and it'll be really cluttered, and it causes some awkward positioning and posturing. And so, I'll kind of raise the question of, well, how often do you actually use this item? And it can be hard to know sometimes. But once you have that question asked, I think it kind of brings it into the back of the mind, and so you may be able to better evaluate and say to yourself, "Oh heck, I don't use this very often, so I can move this into the further away zone." Once again, Carrie had a few graphics earlier, and she talked about the 90 degrees with the upper and lower arm, as well as the upper and lower leg. That's generally, when we come in to do these ergonomic assessments, that's generally what we're looking for, trying to maintain those angles as close as possible. You'll never be 100% perfect, but if as long as you can get pretty close to the 90 degrees, that's you're really going to be on a good path at that point. Other things to consider is the monitor and positioning of the monitor. Now, there are a few factors to consider with that, and that is how many monitors do you have, right? If you have one monitor, that makes it pretty simple. It's just going to be directly in front of you. When we do these assessments, essentially 20 to 40 inches away from the screen with the eyes is where we look to be. So if you can get in that middle part, that 30-inch range, you're pretty well off at that point. A lot of times, what will happen is if you're too far away, it can cause eye strain. And what I have found is that people will, whether they realize it or not, they will kind of lean in, and a lot of times they will slouch their head forward to be able to read off the screen. So that's why, generally 20, 40 inches, that's going to keep you in a pretty good range to where you should hopefully not have to deal with that too much. And then on the flip side, if you are too close to the screen, it can also cause eye strain. So, if you find yourself, with some eye strain at the end of the day, there's a possibility that maybe the screen's too close or too far away from you. Unfortunately, I think that this is especially with I'm 31, so I think a lot of the kids younger than me, I see kids playing video games like 10 inches away from the screen, and it makes me cringe because I'm like, you're destroying your eyes doing that. So definitely in the work environment, 20 to 40 inches, that's a really good rule of thumb. Other things with chair setup, and I believe I actually have a slide later on down the road. It can be tough with the armrests to get that right, but there's kind of a sweet spot with the armrest to where we want to have enough support from the armrest when we're using the keyboard and mouse to the point where it's not pushing up on our arms and it can cause some shoulder stress, but we don't want them too far down because then we don't get any support. So it can be kind of tough, but finding that sweet spot is really what we look to do, and that's where having someone come and do an ergonomic assessment like myself, I could take a look at that and I'd be able to just see, hey, I think we're too low or too high up. Keeping your wrists in a neutral posture. There are definitely pieces of equipment, ergonomic keyboards on the marketplace that will help you maintain closer to a neutral posture. The keyboards that I'm going to hold mine up, keyboards that almost everyone has, they're nice and flat. And unfortunately, it will cause us to rotate our hands and our wrists in. And so if you can have an ergonomic keyboard, now there are some funky ones on the marketplace. I like to go with kind of a nice middle raised unit to where it's going to get you a little bit closer to that neutral posture for your wrist. So there are certainly pieces of equipment that can help with that. Let's see here. So ergonomic and chair fitting. Now, the chair, when I do assessments, that's a lot of times people reach out and they're like, "Hey, I need a new chair." And to be honest with you, a lot of times people will, unfortunately, it will be the case. And I think a lot of times what happens is, people will move into a new job or into a new department or maybe occupy a new space, and there will be hand-me-down chairs, whether they were there for 15, 20, 30 years, and you wound up being the lucky person that gets stuck with that one, or maybe we've sourced them through, maybe we've gone a surplus, or maybe we've sourced them from another location. And a lot of times, the chair may not be the right fit for the individual user. There are things we can try and do to combat that if we're not able to get a better chair right off the bat. And so, what we can look to do is try and get the seat pan, which is what you physically sit in, right around the knee. Ideally, we have a chair that will have a lot of adjustability to it, right? And so, what do I mean by adjustability? I mean, we can not only adjust the height of the chair, but we can also adjust the seat pan depth, which is what, like I mentioned earlier, what you physically sit in. And what do I mean by the adjustability for the seat pan depth? Meaning I can slide that seat pan out or in. And so that will really accommodate based on the individual person, whether they're tall or short or anything in between. But really, what we look to do is have about 2 to 3 inches of space between the front edge of the seat pan and then the back of the leg. That's really kind of that distance we look to maintain. Other things to consider, as I mentioned, the armrests. Having armrests that are adjustable is only part of the problem. So we want not only height, but ideally, if we can have armrests that will slide in and out and forward and back, that will allow us to adjust to get the armrest to be usable. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to do an ergonomic assessment and someone's sitting in a chair with armrests that don't adjust, right? They're just static armrests. It's almost like a conference room chair. I've seen that plenty of times. And so what ends up happening is that that individual person has no armrest support. So ideally, if someone were to come in and say, hey, I'm coming into a space, set me up with the ideal equipment that you can get. One of them is a good ergonomic chair, and the other piece would actually be a standing workstation. That would be kind of my two biggest pieces. I would always recommend, but I also understand that may not always be the case. Maybe budgets are tight, and so there are certainly things we can try and do in the interim to hopefully adjust it and have that custom fit for the individual user. Yeah, it's just mentioning kind of what I was just discussing. Generally, about 2 to 3 inches of space between the front edge of the seat pan and the back of the leg. So, generally you can put 2 to 3 fingers, and that will give you a pretty good idea if that's enough space between. So, a lot of times, what I will see is if you have a chair that doesn't have adjustable seat pan depth, it will depend on the height of the person, but with shorter folks, what I will see a lot of times is a seat pan will extend so far out, doesn't fit them well, and it pushes up on the bottom of their legs, and so they'll start to have leg pain. On the flip side, if we've got a chair and the seat pan depth is not far enough out for the individual user, I have had folks explain to me kind of the feeling of like you're almost sliding out of the chair. And so you're essentially just not getting enough support from that seat pan. And so that's why it's really important to have a chair, ideally, that will allow us to adjust that seat pan depth. Ideally, the chair also has lumbar support too. If you've ever, there may be a few folks in here that I've done an ergonomic assessment for. The chair, I'm a huge fan of Steelcase, which is a brand, and that Steelcase chair has lumbar adjustability to it, and so it will actually allow you to slide up and down, kind of where that lumbar sits at, and then they also will allow you to adjust the firmness. It depends on the model, but I'm not saying that other chairs and other brands can't have that, but ideally we have adjustability as far as lumbar goes, and we can get that situated in the lower back to provide enough support for us. Seat width. Ideally, we have a chair that's not too narrow or too wide for us, right? And so shoulder width is essentially where we would want that seat width to be. Chairs can be ordered in larger sizes as well to accommodate for a wider section. And so having that's why it's really important to have the right chair for the individual user. So having us that adjustability for the seat width would be ideal anytime we're selecting a chair. Armrest positioning, this is as I was discussing earlier, finding that sweet spot. Ideally, if you can get it level with your working surface or the table where you have your keyboard and mouse, that's kind of what we're looking to do. That's what we're looking to accomplish. That way, it does provide us support. Um, we don't want to be too high up, right? Because then what you'll see is it will press on the lower arms and then it will press up on the upper arms. And of course, it will cause Generally it will be you'll feel that in the shoulders is where generally where that discomfort will arise. Armrest too low, you can start to have back and neck pressure as well. And then the other piece that I'll see is it will cause people to rest their forearms and their wrists on the edge of that table surface. And then that can create its own issue too. And then we start to have wrist and finger and hand discomfort and pain too, because then we can start to rest on those soft tissues and it can cause stress and strain. So really just aligned with what I was just discussing with the armrest. So generally we want the work surface or the desk that you're at to be aligned with the armrest and vice versa. Monitor placement. So I talked about the distance, mentioned about 20 to 40 inches. As far as the height goes, it will depend on if you wear bifocals, so meaning if you have glasses and you have to if you find yourself having to look through the bottom or change your head angle to be able to see on the screen, generally what we'll say is bring the screen a little bit lower than eye level. Otherwise, every other person, what we look to do is have the eyes be level with the top level of the screen. That's really kind of how we set it up. One other piece I will talk about is if you have two monitors, essentially, you'd want them kind of splayed out in front of you, almost like a book, to where the spine of the book or the spine or the middle part of the two monitors would align with the spine of the body. There you go. I keep getting ahead of myself. So now the one caveat, if you don't mind going back to the one caveat would be how much time you spend on the monitors. So generally, I would say 50-50, 60-40. You would use it, you would set up your monitors kind of like in the illustration to the right. However, if you spend 70 or more percent of your time on one screen over the other, I would have them set up kind of like on the left illustration there, where the majority monitor is directly in front of you, and then offset to the side and angled towards you is the other monitor. Hard edges. I see this pretty often too. And so, if we could get a height adjustable desk, that is the ideal situation. It really will prevent a lot of this from occurring. But if not, there are other solutions we can use. We can use wrist pads, wrist rests. These are generally pretty cheap items. I've even seen sometimes people will get like a pole foam noodle or something to that effect, or maybe some kind of shipping like not styrofoam, but some kind of material that they put in packing to keep things from breaking. And I've seen people put those on the edges of the tables and desks, and those can kind of soften those edges, which will prevent as much stress and discomfort that can be created from those hard table edges. Good illustration of what I was talking about with ergonomic keyboard, ergonomic mouse. So that's going to hopefully keep us from getting outside of that neutral posture as much as possible. So generally, the ergonomic keyboards they'll be a little bit wider and a little bit they'll have a little bit more depth than your typical keyboard will, and so it will allow our hand and wrist positioning to be a little bit more neutral or natural posture. Same thing. I talked about excessive reach earlier. Trying to keep that. I have on occasion seen where someone will have the keyboard directly in front of them and then they'll have the mouse a little bit further away. Generally, we don't want to do that. We want to try and keep both of those items as close into the body as possible. The other thing to consider with keyboards, and it's a little bit counterintuitive, and I say that because every single keyboard comes with these little tabs where it raises the angle of the keyboard. So realistically, what you want to do is you want to try and keep the keyboard flat or even at a negative angle, which the only way you can accomplish that would be to have you could have a keyboard tray, or some of the newer ones will kind of maintain that that 0 degree angle or that negative angle. But unfortunately, a lot of the keyboards that everyone has will have those little tabs on the back. That's if you look at the bottom left illustration there with the X next to it. Uh, those tabs will unfortunately make a positive angle, and we don't want to do that. It's a little counterintuitive, so trying to avoid using those tabs on the back of the keyboard. Illumination glare, that's another piece of ergonomics that we will sometimes encounter. People reach out to us and they'll be experiencing eye strain, or I've even had extreme circumstances where people were experiencing migraine headaches and kind of other headache related issues. Um, some of those were a bit of personal health, but only exacerbated by the work environment. So there are certainly things you can do. Trying to reduce glare as much as possible would really be one of the best ways to combat that. Whether that's using blinds, I think in one circumstance we even had to the individual user had to almost tape up some paper to be able to block out external light coming from the hallway. Things like that can be a way you can combat it. They do make screen covers as well for monitors. Another piece would be, indirect lighting. So getting a lamp and setting it up into your work environment, your workspace. One of the unfortunate parts of office work too is we will have folks that will work in spaces where there is zero natural lighting, and it can be stinky. It's ideally we have natural lighting as our background. That's like best case scenario, but unfortunately we do have office spaces where that's just not the case, and so you'll typically have kind of harsh lighting over top. What I have found to help is some people will have a lamp in their office. And so I think that can really provide softer lighting, and it will reduce some of that eye strain.
Let's stop the share right there because I see that there's some questions in the chat, and I want to make sure that we get those um, to them. So, how does sitting increase osteoporosis? Because of that spinal loading, right? So, the pressure that I talked about, when our spine is curved like this, it is designed to take the energy and the force from when we're walking, and it's designed to reverberate that on out. And when we're sitting, we take out the ability to reverberate, and so it gets absorbed into the body, and so that wreaks havoc on the bones. That's the answer to your question. Increases the risk for osteoporosis. Osteoporosis is a bone problem. The personal training 3-session program is great. Oh, I'm glad you liked it. The session is, yeah, so we offer personal training through MoveWell. It's been a pilot program that we started in January, but we are getting ready to extend that. So the first 3 sessions, it's $65 to do the intro package. That's an assessment with Dawn, our personal trainer, and then he takes you through 2 sessions, and it's $65. And then you have the ability to purchase more if you want to keep working with a personal trainer. Looks like the next one might be for you, Josh. After looking at these zones, I'm wondering if maybe too shallow of a desk can cause issues.
Yeah, I think so. I've run into a few individuals that have limited desk space, and it will unfortunately create issues with not only the positioning of the keyboard and mouse, but I think it can cause some of those issues that the individual was mentioning. And that's where, it'd be great to have a third person come in and check out a workspace and give their opinions on maybe a different piece of equipment that would be better.
And then we are going to send out information. How can we get an ergonomic assessment? I see that in the chat. We're going to send out this recording. We're going to send out the slides. We're going to send out contact information for being able to schedule an ergonomic assessment, an exercise consult, whatever direction you think you might want to go. We're going to send that out. Good question. Working full time from a home office, from the couch or a table to mix up movement, or is this to be avoided? I'll let you go, Josh.
What? Where's that one at?
Kelly asked if working full time from a home office, is it okay to work from the couch or a table to mix up my movement?
Um, Generally, I would say working from a couch would not be the ideal situation. Neither would working in a kitchen chair either, like a hard wooden kitchen chair. Ideally, if we can get a decent ergonomic chair and a desk, a actual dedicated desk, that would be the ideal. I would say couch, maybe if you did it for 10, 15 minutes just to switch it up, that might be okay, but extended amount of time, hour, 2+ hours, that would not be ideal. I say that I think a lot of folks here probably experienced this during COVID. I know myself when I wasn't at UK, I was at a different location when they sent me home. I was working remotely and I did not have any kind of setup. Had a laptop and I had a couch that was in my apartment and I was just trying to sit on that and I caused myself all sorts of lower back discomfort. So I would say ideally, the couch is not the best setup. Neither is a bed. Same thing for a bed.
Yep. And then do you think standing desks are better than sitting desks? David, ideally you switch back and forth, right? So maybe you stand for an hour, you sit for an hour, you stand for an hour, you sit for an hour, or maybe it's task dependent, right? Like I can stand up while I'm listening to this Zoom meeting, right? I can see the slides, I can stand up, I might even be able to wiggle around and move a little bit. But eventually I'm probably going to need to sit down and do some work that's a little bit more intense where I need to sit. So I would say ideally we're rotating back and forth, standing and sitting.
Agreed.
Home office, do you guys do an ergonomic assessment for a office? Josh, do y'all do that like via Zoom or something?
Yeah, those can be tough. We can definitely set up an appointment, a Zoom meeting or Teams meeting, and we can kind of discuss what the environment looks like. Kind of the other piece of that is the equipment part. UK, I think they created during COVID a policy for taking work equipment home. And so, but it's generally speaking, it's up to the individual department to decide, if you can take chairs home, things like that. So, but yes, we could absolutely do an assessment for a home office setup. Good questions.
Yeah, those are very good questions. All right. Well, if those questions come to you later, feel free to email us. We are going to give you our contact information in the follow-up email that you guys should be getting later today as soon as I get this thing uploaded to YouTube. So if you think of those, you can send them our way. We are a little bit over time. So thanks for sticking with us and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.